Ukraine's success begins not in 2025, but on the first day of the invasion, February 24, 2022. That morning, Russia launched its so-called special military operation, expecting Kyiv to fall within days. The plan hinged on one decisive strike, the capture of Hostomel Airport just outside the capital. Hostomel was supposed to serve as an air bridge. Russia sent roughly 300 elite paratroopers aboard 34 helicopters to seize the runway and hold it until reinforcements arrived. Once secure, thousands of troops would pour in by air, surrounding Kyiv from within and forcing the Ukrainian government to surrender. On paper, it was a textbook Soviet maneuver, fast, surgical, and devastating. In practice, it became the first major failure of the war. Ukraine had anticipated the move. Thanks to intelligence from Western partners and its own radar network, Ukrainian troops were already stationed nearby, armed with man-portable air defense systems and a few aging Zu-23 anti-aircraft guns from the Soviet era. They even blocked the runway with scrap vehicles and decoy aircraft to prevent Russian planes from landing. When the Russian paratroopers arrived, they walked into a storm of anti-aircraft fire. Helicopters fell, the airstrip became unusable, and by the time ground reinforcements tried to push through the next day, the Ukrainian artillery had already shelled the entire site. The Russian airborne assault collapsed, and with it, Putin's plan for a three-day war. That single tactical victory bought Ukraine the most valuable resource in war: time. Learning, adapting, advancing. From that moment forward, Ukraine's war strategy was defined by adaptation. By late 2022, Ukrainian commanders had learned to exploit Russia's weaknesses: poor coordination, outdated doctrine, and overstretched logistics. The result was the Kharkiv counteroffensive of September 2022, one of the fastest military advances in modern history. In just a week, Ukrainian forces liberated hundreds of settlements and recaptured roughly 2,000 square kilometers of territory. They advanced at nearly 5 miles per day, forcing Russian troops to retreat chaotically and abandon massive stockpiles of weapons. This operation proved that Ukraine could not only defend itself, it could also take the initiative. It was, in effect, the first phase of a long-term plan to push Russia backward, one front at a time. Taking the war across the border. The second phase began in August 2024 with the Kursk incursion. In a bold and unexpected move, Ukrainian troops crossed the border into Russia's Kursk region, capturing around 480 square miles of territory, a larger gain than Russia had achieved in the first 7 months of that year. The operation was limited in scope, but its strategic impact was enormous. For the first time, Russia had to defend its own territory, and in doing so, it exposed just how rigid its military planning really was. It took Moscow over a month to regroup and mount a counteroffensive, pulling an estimated 50,000 troops away from the front in Donbass to reinforce the border. This diversion alone stalled Russia's broader operations and crippled its logistics for months. Ukraine's message was clear: you are not safe even inside your own borders. The following spring, in March 2025, Ukraine launched a similar offensive into Belgorod, a region wedged between Kursk and Donbass. This time, the incursions were supported by long-range strikes from F-16 and Mirage 2000 recently supplied by the West. Unlike in 2022, Ukraine was no longer just defending, it was shaping the geography of the war itself. Drones, the revolution in warfare. If tanks and troops represented the old face of war, drones became Ukraine's new secret weapon. Before 2022, combat drones like the American Reaper cost tens of millions of dollars, too expensive to deploy in large numbers. But Ukraine flipped that logic on its head. Instead of designing high-end aircraft, it started with cheap commercial drones, the kind used for filming or agriculture, and modified them with explosives, guidance systems, and long-range communication links. By 2023, Ukraine had effectively democratized drone warfare. Soldiers, engineers, and even civilians built and programmed these flying machines in garages and small workshops. Soon, both short-range FPV drones and long-range strategic models became central to every operation. These innovations allowed Ukraine to strike hundreds of miles beyond the front lines, deep into Russian territory. Among the most notable attacks was a September 2024 strike on TERRA-FRONT, which reportedly destroyed 30,000 tons of munitions, and a massive January 2025 assault on the Engels Air Base, home to Russia's strategic bombers. Engels lies nearly 500 miles from Ukraine's border, a clear sign that no part of Russia's war infrastructure was untouchable. Then came Operation Spiderweb, one of the most audacious campaigns of the war. Ukraine smuggled compact drones, equipped with mobile network receivers, deep inside Russia to hit 5 air bases that hosted nuclear-capable bombers. One of the targets, Belaya Air Base, sits over 2,700 miles from Ukraine, a staggering demonstration of how far Ukrainian drones could reach through covert supply chains and creative engineering. And as these strikes intensified, Russia's ability to refine oil and fuel its war machine began to crumble. By early 2025, Reuters estimated that drone attacks had knocked out around 17% of Russia's oil refining capacity, costing billions in lost revenue. Economic warfare. Ukraine's military tactics were backed by another front, economic warfare, driven by Western sanctions and strategic targeting. Oil and gas make up between 20% and 50% of Russia's national budget. Cutting that income was essential to choking its war effort. Before the war, the European Union imported over 40% of its gas from Russia. By 2025, that number had fallen to just 11%, with plans to phase it out completely by 2027. Russia turned eastward, to India and China, but that shift came at a steep cost. China, sensing Moscow's desperation, demanded discounts of up to 50% on Russian oil and gas. At the same time, global sanctions forced Russia to rely on a risky shadow fleet of foreign-flagged tankers to ship crude under the radar. This workaround helped keep exports flowing, but it destroyed profit margins and raised insurance and maintenance costs dramatically. Each new sanction cut deeper, slowly transforming Russia's once lucrative energy empire into a barely profitable lifeline. Meanwhile, its once powerful arms industry, the world's second largest before 2022, had all but collapsed. Exports dropped by over 90% between 2021 and 2024 as foreign clients lost confidence in Russian weaponry. The reason was simple: they were watching those same weapons being destroyed daily on Ukrainian soil. The strain within Russia. By 2025, the Kremlin was pouring roughly 40% of its annual budget into the military, a level unseen since the Soviet era. Yet even that wasn't sustainable. Facing mounting costs, Russia announced a 7% defense spending cut for 2026 and new tax increases to patch the economy. The burden fell hardest on the domestic workforce: teachers, doctors, police, and pensioners, Putin's traditional support base. Official inflation hovered around 9%, but real inflation for essentials exceeded 20%. Meanwhile, the cost in human lives kept rising. Independent estimates suggested that Russia had suffered over 1 million casualties, dead, wounded, or permanently disabled, by early 2025. Another 1 million people, mostly skilled professionals, had fled the country since 2022. At the same time, Russia faced a demographic collapse decades in the making. Low birth rates in the 1990s, combined with wartime losses, created a shortage of young workers that no amount of propaganda could fix. The unemployment rate fell to a record low of 2.4%, but this wasn't a sign of prosperity. It was a symptom of labor scarcity. Factories lacked workers, hospitals lacked doctors, even the military struggled to fill its ranks. Economists described it as a slow-motion implosion, a society exhausting itself just to sustain a failing war. The turning point: Ukraine's strategy, by contrast, relied on time and pressure. Every drone strike, every counteroffensive, every new sanction was designed to erode Russia's capacity faster than Ukraine's own. In many ways, Kyiv's greatest weapon wasn't firepower, it was patience. By demonstrating operational success and transparency, Ukraine convinced its allies that every dollar and missile sent was a meaningful investment. That perception, in turn, unlocked further waves of Western aid. More advanced air defenses, jets, and long-range missiles, each one amplifying Ukraine's reach. This created a feedback loop. Success on the battlefield generated support abroad, and that support made further success possible. The domino effect. As 2025 progressed, analysts began speaking openly of Russia's slow collapse. Its economic growth, fueled by emergency wartime demand, started to stall. Geopolitically, Moscow found itself increasingly isolated, its influence in Central Asia and Africa fading, and its dependence on China deepening to near-vassal levels. Beijing now dictated trade terms, prices, and even the pace of technology transfer. Russia, once the senior partner in Eurasia, had become the junior one. This is the endgame Ukraine is counting on, not a single decisive battle, but a chain reaction, a final domino falling when Russia's economic foundation and social cohesion give way under sustained pressure. The vision of victory. Ukraine's plan to win the war isn't built on miracles. It's built on math, adaptation, and endurance. The blueprint is simple but powerful. Keep Russia bleeding resources it can't replace. maintain Western unity through visible, measurable results, undermine Russia's economy faster than it can rebuild, and most importantly, outlast. Putin once believed he could conquer Ukraine in 3 days. Now, years later, his army is entrenched, his economy is cracking, and his country faces demographic decline. Every day the war continues, Russia grows weaker, while Ukraine grows more capable, more integrated with the West, and more determined than ever. If these trends hold, the impossible might just become reality, the liberation of Ukrainian territory and peace negotiated from strength, not surrender. The outcome of this war will shape not just Ukraine and Russia, but the global balance of power for decades to come. And if history remembers anything about this conflict, it may be this: that a smaller nation, armed with courage, ingenuity, and patience, managed to rewrite the rulebook of modern warfare, one drone, one strike, and one victory at a time.